When you're designing characters as an artist, it can be tricky to know where to begin. There's a huge variety of different techniques and tools that you can use as a concept designer, and some of these will change depending on whether or not you're working in production or whether you're just doing this for fun, just on your own. What I want to share with you today is just me starting to ideate some designs for a personal project of mine, and I'm going to share with you a really interesting process that I often use both as a professional and when I'm doing my own designs. This is where we're going to combine really quick, rough sketching almost to the level of detail that you would get in a thumbnail, but I'm just going to do it a little bit bigger. Then we're going to add some color, and I'll share with you right at the end some different techniques for how just in 5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, maybe sort of 10 minutes, you can take some of these really rough designs and just add a little bit more detail, a little bit more refinement, polish them off a little bit. I find this is a really good way to just get some ideas out there really quickly, just in a sort of 1 or 2 hour session, and then see what's there. And then take this to the next level with the next round of designs. This is exactly the process I often use really early on in a project. You'll learn a lot about character design and specific line and color process when it comes to designing your own characters. As usual though, for a Drawing Codex video, this is not going to be heavily edited nor fast-paced. This is real-time, fully narrated. It's just you and me. I'm showing you exactly from the very beginning to the very end how I would create a lineup of characters. This is not pre-recorded. There's nothing prepared. I'm literally just saying, hey, I wanted to do this. Let's hit record and see what happens. So hopefully that sounds interesting. Hopefully you'll join me. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about line and color illustration, the same style that I create all my comics and illustrations in, you can check out my free quick start guide. It's aimed to get you up and running quickly in Photoshop, developing your own simple, reliable line and color process. It's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out. All right, let's just jump in and get started here. So I've got an example of where I guess I'm headed in terms of the fidelity and what I'm trying to optimize for when I do these kind of initial designs and just sort of play around and ideate. These are designs that I did for quite a while ago, but it gives us an idea for what I guess I'm looking for in terms of the level of detail and what we're trying to do. This is going to be for just sort of a group of a secret society as part of a fantasy comic that I was thinking of for quite a long time ago. So I'm just sort of looking at, okay, let's see what this would look like. I've done some work on it before, but nothing kind of major. The working title I have is that they are called the Cult of the Blue Flame, and they would be kind of a secret society or a group of assassins. And again, the goal here is that this is a fairly sort of high energy comic book style story, so it's worthwhile keeping a couple of these brief ideas in mind. So we kind of need to make sure, because it's a comic, that we have interesting faces. So I'll see if I can sort of work in some face designs to these, because that's just a major part of putting things into comics, is you need to constantly be showing people talking up close in panels, so that's really important. I think something that's also worth looking at is that it's important that characters have good, strong cover presence. I think a good example of a good comic book design is like if you could just have that character on the cover of the comic book, like would it feel interesting, compelling? Again, that's just personally for these types of projects, I find that's useful. And, just as a single pinup, right? It's going to draw attention and get people sort of interested in being like, what is that about? So I think these things do have to have like a video game level heightened sense of kind of design and craziness, right? Specifically for this type of project. And I think that also these need to be kind of easy to draw because it's a comic book, obviously. And I think also it would fit with a slightly simpler style. So, looking for something that's a bit more, obviously a bit more clean line, but than these, right? None of the sketchiness. But again, when we're doing concept design, we can do that, no problem. So let's look at, again, how I would sort of tackle this type of challenge. Normally I have quite a number of these kind of templates, and I'll just sort of use this basic idea here to help me sort of get the process started. And there's a number of different ways you can kind of start this process, but the way that I would like to do it is I would normally actually kind of start with a slightly sort of fainter brush here. And I like to think about this as if it's kind of a marker, right? So a couple of things that are good to think about, and this will just be sort of the initial kind of sketchy phase here. But yeah, think about like, okay, ground plane is kind of here. And if we think about sort of where the horizon line is, right, like maybe kind of up here. This will help us to position a lot of these characters. We're drawing on the wrong layer. Just putting in some basic marks like this will help us to position the characters in space and also make sure that larger characters kind of appear larger. And I'm also going to kind of say, like, let's make sure that like an average size character is going to be about this big. So this gives us something at least to kind of go with. And again, I'm not sure how many of these I'll sort of get through, but this is normally what I would do is I would just start by drawing characters in a lineup here. And I kind of have like a vague series of kind of ideas that are worth kind of exploring, but a lot of these are just kind of visual shape ideas. And what I often like to do is just sort of explore these on this kind of broad level, right? Like, will the silhouette be interesting? And this is essentially like a silhouette design kind of process, but yeah, really focused on just, hey, let's see what happens when we kind of draw those silhouettes. And the other thing that we can sort of think about is like how far or how extreme do we want these designs to be in terms of, you know, the sort of exaggeration or what's going on. Again, this would be a real sort of comic book, right? With sort of fantasy creatures, video game level designs, right? We're not going for sort of subtlety here. So I like the idea of all these characters being somewhat creature-like, right? We're not quite sure what's going on, but they're all kind of unified as being part of this secret society, which is kind of has this kind of flame symbol to it, right? So the idea is we can have blue as an organizing principle. We can have these feelings of kind of assassins or secret society, or them being sort of shrouded as part of the design process, but also some of this kind of flame iconography or visual design language. And so this would be sort of someone that's more creature-ish, more like a sort of hunched over, strange sort of monster. And again, I like the idea of stories where a lot of the characters are, non-human, right? But they still have like sort of interesting things to say, right? That you would just have like sort of different creatures and monsters kind of walking around. Because again, when I was always interested in fantasy stories, I always kind of feel like people don't go sort of far enough in terms of making them kind of weird and interesting. I feel like that's one of the things we can do in comics. So yeah, I kind of just like thinking about this. Now, the problem with this from a demo perspective, and I always sort of find this, is it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing in the beginning, because these are all just kind of a mess, right? These are all just kind of mushy nothing. But this really is a process similar to where we'd be designing video game characters, where I'm kind of trying to focus and optimize for interesting shape designs, stuff looking kind of crazy and exaggerated. But I kind of had the idea that all of these characters will kind of have a blue cloak and it would be blue inside. I don't know, just one of those things that kind of pops into my head. I have no idea whether that will kind of make sense, but this character would be a bit sort of ragged. The other thing that I always like to do in terms of design is think about, so here we got the ground plane, think about like, I'm doing this lineup, right? Like some of these are going to feel more kind of extreme, more exaggerated than other ones, right? Boom, boom. And that's kind of fine. And also they, don't necessarily have to be that original in terms of the work that I'm doing. I'm just looking for different, I guess, versions of this kind of idea. But yeah, I don't want them to be too functional or feel like they kind of have any purpose. These are all just people who exist and are primarily employed as sort of warriors or individuals in this sort of private society. And I think the original idea I had was that this would be this sort of series of people in the Ara fantasy comic that I drew, and that they would be wanting to sort of kill her in some way, shape, or form. So this really is just a matter of coming up with crazy ideas. And again, this is so important when you're coming up with your own ideas and things, to think about like, what is the purpose? Because when you're mixing creating in terms of visuals and designs, and then you're mixing creating in terms of story, is that we kind of need to know, like, what is the purpose of this design? Like, am I actually trying to define exactly what these characters are in every sort of aspect in the story? Like, no. The design task that I have right now is really a matter of just saying, let's come up with a whole bunch of as visually interesting designs as possible that I feel like kind of fit this world and kind of work. And then I'll be able to sit back and say, you know what? These ones are too crazy. These ones are sort of just right. And so the other thing is, yeah, I'm not necessarily going to erase anything if these characters are the wrong size or whatever. I'll just, we'll just resize them and be really brutal. All right, so we could kind of say, yeah, maybe this one is like more smaller. Right, maybe this character is like a bit bigger. So yeah, we can hack away, and you could also do this process if you wanted. You could do it in your sketchbook and then kind of, just import just this level, and then, do the next pass that we're going to do, which is a little bit more detail. So the good thing about just ideating and being messy is that often you have like somewhat of an idea of what you're kind of drawing, right? So I kind of am thinking and imagining like, oh, maybe this character would look a particular way. But also I can just, if something appears, I get happy accidents, right? Working this way is really good for just going in that new direction. And often when you're sketching at this sort of fidelity, right, it's very easy to kind of say, like, oh, this is what I'm doing. Like, I've got this idea. Like, there's the thing that I'm thinking about as I'm doing it. And then there's me coming back later and being like, oh, you know what? That was a dumb idea. But how about this? How about this other thing that I think would work given what's sort of going on there? So yeah, as you kind of get more used to designing for, as you get more used to kind of designing on the lineup, it'll become a lot easier to just dial in all the proportions and stuff. Often it takes a little bit of time, I find, to kind of really get that exactly right. You could certainly use, sort of squash and stretching with warp tool, like whatever it takes, right? The goal here is not to think of this as a drawing task, is to think of this as primarily a design task. So yeah, different ideas. And you can easily just do these, and then, you just kind of think like, none of these are any good. That's fine, right? They might be useful for something else, but yeah, may not be 100% useful here. And the other thing is that I'm making these kind of dark, right? So that you can see them a little bit more as a demo, but also making them more faint, right? Sort of drawing like this can be actually better from an ideation point of view, because it forces you to think vaguely, right? Like none of the marks you're making are really that solid, so it doesn't really matter, you know, if they're good or bad. All right. I'll move it back to being a little bit darker though. And one of the things I find is that, you know, this is sort of the first pass I'm doing here. You know, often these ideas come out a little bit more generic, right? They come out a little bit more meh. You know, it does take a while to kind of look at this and go, okay, what else do I need, right? Like, what do I need to take this to a whole new level, right? And that's one of the questions we'll ask as a design process, as a brainstorming tool, right? Once I've sort of done this sort of first step, then we'll ask the question: are these any good? Could I make them more interesting? Right? Or is this all there is? And the other thing that's good about lineups as a design tool, and there's probably a whole video in this, you know, just by itself, but one of the things that is good about lineups is that you kind of start to create designs that actually kind of work together, right? So you kind of notice when the shapes look the same, right? When things seem like they're all a bit samey. And the other thing is we can sort of look at what designs we would sort of use to pull all of these together. What design elements, what visual language we would use to maybe make you know, these feel a lot more consistent. But yeah, let's think about just one more. Maybe more of a like witchy kind of creature. Similar sort of shape design to this, but although maybe let's maybe not make it right the same shape design. Let's maybe make it a bit more like this. Yeah, so far I'm like, it's kind of interesting. I'm not really feeling many of these right yet. From an interest point of view. Maybe we'll add some dragons, right? That will make it seem more interesting. Maybe the dragon could be blue. That would be the thing that would sort of make it interesting. So yeah, normally I like to set like a much higher number of these, right? You know, I like to sort of do 20 if I'm doing an initial pass. I like to, that way when I'm in this frame of mind right at the beginning and I feel like I'm like, you know, these are all looking generic, I kind of know I've got another 15 or, you know, sort of 16 to go, and I don't sort of freak out as much. And yeah, we could definitely do some like this. So yeah, not quite sure about like what the features would be of like sort of this character, but actually I don't think it matters because we don't really need to know that. We can just kind of go. So what I probably would do next is just essentially move them under this bit of tracing paper that I have here. And then I'll just do a finished sketch and we'll just kind of see what happens, right? And this is also one of these aspects of, where are we? It's gonna freak out, do something weird. Oh no, here we go. There we go, boom. Cool, got the right brush. Yeah, this is another one of those aspects I think of designing, is to just kind of commit to the process, right? Like sort of see what happens. It's super easy to get a bit discouraged if you are sort of in that sort of first sort of pass of these and go, oh, you know what? None of those thumbnails are looking good. But, you know, let's imagine, I think this is often where I get way better ideas, is if I am working professionally, right, and I get to that phase where I've sort of done a bunch of sketches for the day and, you know, none of it's, I'm like, oh, I'm not really sure. It's like, well, it doesn't matter because I have to do these because I'm getting paid for it. And often it's that sort of creativity that makes you kind of dig deep or just kind of see where it goes. And yeah, then often, you know, even sometimes I find like, I'm like, oh yeah, none of those really turned out. These are often the thoughts that are going through my mind, right, as I'm kind of at this phase, right? That's why I'm sort of sharing this. But yeah, this is certainly not pre-prepared in any way. I have no idea. I just kind of sat down. I was like, I reckon I'll make a video about that. And here we are. Yeah, I want this to be a bit more. Yeah, I feel like those eyes are a bit sad. Let's see whether we can. See whether we can kind of fix that. And again, I might come back and have another pass at this face. Not entirely convinced. So let's think about the kind of shape design I sort of had planned. Yeah, and even though this is right sort of design, I'm still gonna, like, even though we're on the sort of final, I'm still gonna see if I can. We can also maybe flip. See whether I've got the right. Flip the canvas. Go back. This can be a really sort of good tool to use if you are just doing a double pass. Just flip. That'll make sure at least, you know, the drawing isn't terrible. But yeah, gonna be messy. Yeah, it's looking a bit better. So just kind of edging up on it, right? And again, I have no idea what these things are. Maybe some kind of weapon he has. So carrying there. So it does take quite a bit of practice to get your kind of two-pass design sort of sketching functioning, because you're really having to put together quite a number of things at sort of each stage. But yeah, this is, you know, this is one of the skills that I think is really good to sort of build as a concept designer, is just like going for it and seeing what happens, right? There is a certain amount of fear and uncertainty about how these things will turn out, but that's kind of part of the fun, right? That's often where you get happy accidents, or yeah, you just kind of explore. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, so I like that he's kind of like a Toad style character. See if I can refine that stuff later on. Erase here. Right, and we got this kind of hand here. Now again, when we're doing sort of concept art, right, drawing hands is a bit of a luxury, I kind of find. It's good to be able to do as good a job as you kind of can, but often, you know, these are not the things that kind of matter, right? We just sort of need a slight gestural kind of hand. As long as we kind of know it's sort of working. I think this is going to need to come right the other way. And here, I sort of had this idea that this thing would actually come up. Maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe that can happen there. Yeah, and I think these kind of clubbing kind of forearms also like a good idea. Something kind of really chunky. So this is again the process that I would normally use, right? We're kind of just exploring. We're doing these kind of single drawings. We can erase, and you can do this traditionally as well, right? Just erasing, messing around, right? Seeing what works. Boom, 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 boom. There we go. All right. See if we can get some extra personality in there. And the other thing I would do potentially is put a little head call out there, see what that's going like. And another thing that is super useful that I'll do now is if we make a different version of this, if we go like window, arrange, or a new window, and then I kind of put this on the screen above, that can be extremely useful for just kind of checking that everything is like going in a decent direction, right? That way I can kind of look up at the other screen, check the process. Boom. There we go. All right. And here I'm going to make a new layer. All right, we'll see if we can do a straight line there. Let's copy it, merge it down. All right, let's erase out here. And then we've got somewhat of a finished shape there. So yeah, super quick, tricks. Right, maybe we could have, again, I feel like this sort of stuff on the back is like not interesting enough. And often I'll just kind of put weird shapes there so that we can kind of be like, okay, that's right. We need something there. Needs to be something going on. But, you know, I don't often figure it out until later. But that is particularly because of this type of project, right? Where I'm really trying to look for kind of visually interesting ideas. And I'm sort of looking for like a bunch of random ideas first, right? You know, that's just important to get. Well, get some interesting stuff down in ideation form. And after I've done that, then I'm going to consider like what is this about? Because I'm mostly just going on intuition for these kind of feelings or ideas that I want to have in the story. Oh. Anyway, let's go here. I've got a thumb. All right, this kind of big hand here. I like these giant sort of meat hook hands. Boom. All right. So yeah, this can get sketchy. That's fine by me. Because again, a lot of these ideas it's essentially like just a more advanced thumbnail, right? Like that's a good way to sort of put it. It's a thumbnail with some context. And see if we can get some weird stuff happening there. And so I'm going to assess these later on, right? And be like, is this any good? Is this interesting? What should I try next? So yeah, not a linear design process. By any means. All right. Let's see if we can put some kind of straps on here that might be holding up this thing on the back. So using a lot of, standard design tropes that I would sort of have from that particular world, from the fantasy comic that these would sort of be a part of. Just trying to see whether we can get something interesting happening. Cool. So we're about half an hour in. Let's flip this. See if he still looks alright. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think the basic idea is there. I feel like this bottom. I feel like this bottom jaw is not quite. Not quite there yet. Boom. All right. Got to stop drawing. Otherwise, this won't get done. Let's flip again. So flip and go back. Where are we? Here. To this character. And I'm going to redraw and reframe a lot of the anatomy that I kind of had here. Just make sure, okay, we got a rib cage, going back to our sort of Loomis method. Center line here. Spine. All right, let's put in the torso. All right, spine's going to come around here. Boom. Put the head here. So I kind of got the rough idea now of where I want to go from a drawing perspective. I'm just going to start that whole process again so we can kind of true it up. Going to have some very sort of chunky arms. But yeah, the process of like, you know, drawing this and handling like the visual design, the anatomy, and most importantly, like really thinking about what you're designing at the same time is very challenging. It's completely unlike, you know, a normal drawing task, right? And it's also very different to a much more sort of structured drawing or design challenge, right? Where you kind of have a much clearer idea of what you're going to do or where you're going to go. So if you do try this again, just understand this is a tricky thing to do. Thinking about some, again, sort of animalistic vibe for this guy. Not sure about that. That feels a bit better. Then we can really play with the shape design of the cheeks. All right, get some proper shape design happening there. I'm not sure about this. I still feel like maybe that's where the head will be. And then the beard is going to come down there. Boom, boom. So we can think of this like often what I'm doing here is like a pass in between, where I'm sort of putting some of these things in, but the process is about like having a go and then being very comfortable letting it all go, right? Boom, 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 boom. All right, and this could have some kind of vaguely interesting sword style design here, but I'm not sure how much of that I'll get to. All right. So it's also really important again to remember, like when we're tackling these designs again, like always go back to whenever I'm sort of looking at it, I'm like, oh, does that, like, is this right? Like, should I fix this? You know, like this is not quite how I want. And especially doing these things live, right? Like just recording it and seeing what happens is, I find this stuff very challenging. I find it very challenging to get good designs happening while I'm doing demos. I've always found that sort of tricky, right? It's easy to kind of redesign something, do something you've kind of done before. It's kind of hard to talk and think and like talk about design principles at the same time. Yeah, always go back to like, what is the goal? What is the point? Again, none of these designs have to be sort of final. And I think I do find like when I sort of look up, when I see the more sort of thumbnail-y sort of version of it, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I remember I'm just doing little kind of design sketches, right? This is not, that these don't have to be final. They're just a point of process. And the other thing is, you know, the quicker I can do these, right, the less important they need to be. right? So the more I can be like, yeah, let's get loose with this, right? Yeah, I feel like I need to do get this the right size, like some plausible size, and then think about how this could be that same blue flame style icon there. Boom. Boom. So this one's a little bit more ill-defined in terms of what it is and what the design language is. But that's cool. All right. So again, let's just be rough. And this is often the difference, right, between trying to practice character design and doing this because you're trying to get better at drawing versus actually doing sort of character design for production, right? I would always look in art books and things. That's not working. I would always sort of look in art books and look at sort of the different stuff that people would do and, you know, just be like, oh man, that stuff is so like loose and rough, and how am I ever going to get that, all right, that same level of looseness or roughness? And in most cases, it's just because people are rushing, right? And you just don't have the time to do any of that sort of fancy drawing. So we tend to just be as rough as possible. So with this character, I'm going to give him some more sort of organized armor and stuff. Still find, yeah, this is not, this leg not quite working. And we certainly could try and do more construction, but again, you know, the question is like, is anyone going to care? Is anyone going to notice this? Probably not. So trying to give this character a bit more of a regal kind of look. Those feet are looking a bit funny. Let's see whether we can. Boom. Oh. Squish this up a bit. Let's fix there. See if we can get this to feel like it's kind of sitting on the same plane. It doesn't necessarily feel like it because this character is. This character needs to have its foot down to kind of feel as if it's sitting on a similar ground plane, right? But yeah, so often, you know, when I would sort of practice trying to do these things, yeah, my stuff would always look like way too rough. Sorry, it would look way too tight, right? I'd be trying to get things to look sort of loose and messy, and I think part of that is just like being able to focus on the task at hand, which is trying to create an interesting sort of lineup, versus trying to focus on, you know, doing good drawing and all that kind of stuff. So I think, again, problem here is we probably need to make these feet a little bit smaller. Yeah. Boom. It's looking a bit better. And yeah, we'll hope that some of this will come out in the wash once we color everything. We'll see. All right, got these two, and yeah, I mean we could just try and do one of them, but I really think it's probably good to do both. I'm just going to separate out these a little bit further. All right, let's see if we can do this. Probably move this one around as well. Boom. All right, so same thing here. Let's redraw. Torso. Center line. Pelvis. Neck. Head. Shoulders. And got legs. These legs are looking kind of pretty long. All right, let's see if we can flow with whatever this design was telling us to do here. Again, just going quickly. All right, so we got eye level around here. All right, face along here. I might just do that profile to make it easier. Again, no idea what I'm doing. I'm just messing around here, creating fun shapes. Oh. And then we've got this thing kind of holding. All right. Okay. No, again, no idea what we're doing here in terms of this clothing or costume. Sometimes it's fun to just kind of make up silly ideas, and then kind of you can always kind of iterate on stuff when you do the finished kind of color, right? You can kind of see what lands, what doesn't. Boom, boom, boom. How much time we got? Not much. All right, so we got some hands. All right, that's not really hands. They're just, it's the idea of hands. Yeah, who knows? this foot is going to go like that. So hopefully we've created enough of an interesting silhouette there to kind of make that kind of work. But yeah, we're sort of running out of time, but that's all right. So often, again, like I haven't been for quite a while actually designing sort of stuff full time, right? Where like months and months and months go by and I'm still just designing characters day in, day out. But yeah, I found like when I was doing that, yeah, sometimes you would just kind of run out of ideas, you'd run out of time, and you know, like you'd be trying to ideate and kind of come up with like really interesting things, and maybe sometimes they just wouldn't work, and sometimes you'd be like, oh, I kind of found an interesting idea in the end, but I sort of don't have time. I don't have time to actually do it justice. So yeah, sometimes they can just be super rough, and that's fine. Again, that can often be the fun. Right, here we got a dragon. Boom. Right. 1, 2. And again, I can, like I was saying before, we can kind of figure out what's going on in the color, because I have some idea here of what's going on, but some of it's getting weird. And again, often it's like just a matter of giving yourself like multiple stabs at the process, right? So we do that initial ideation, right, with that you can see sort of under this where it's like super rough, and then I do, you know, this pass, and then I'm like, sometimes I'm like, well, you know, still not sure what's going on, but there's always the color, right? We can have another go. So sometimes, you know, if I'm not quite sure about some aspects, I'll just kind of leave it, you know, leave it up to the color and kind of see what happens. Some witchy fingers here. Not exactly sure what's going on. I feel like I had this face and now it's kind of lost. Let's flip it back, see if we can. Often I find stuff is going a little bit funny with the drawing, and that will kind of mess everything up. I feel like maybe that ear is like, yeah, not really helping us. All right, boom. Let's see if we can. All right, and now we need some dragon wings of some kind. Boom. So she kind of got this hair. I'm not exactly quite sure what's happening. We'll figure it out. maybe she can actually have this sort of blue flame. Here that she's kind of playing with. Oh. So if we sort of think about what would be happening with her body, right, she's kind of in here, right, sort of hunched over. Let's see if we can indicate some of that here. Put a bit more stuff back there to make it feel more, right? And that's going to be going in. So while, yeah, there's that. I feel like we're going to go in here, come out there. Something like that. Again, these are all just marks, but I'm trying as much as possible to kind of base it off some type of primordial structure underneath there. Kind of eyes of the dragon there. Yeah, anyway, that's probably all we can do. She's got a foot here, a foot there. So this character kind of needs to come down. Boom. Let's turn that one off and let's see what we got. So yeah, I mean, not much time to work with in terms of color, but luckily we have a pretty simple color scheme. So let's look at what we can do using this. What I'll do is, boom, we'll create another one, which will give us another white layer, which will give us slightly more contrast to work with. And let's go into quick mask. And we'll sort of build the silhouettes for these. And this is where, again, I can go in here and sort of modify that silhouette a bit if I need. And we can actually create much cleaner shapes if you want, right? You can kind of be like, oh, here we're going to pay attention to those lines, here we're not. That's typically how I handle it, sort of a first pass, right? It's all just, right? It's sort of suggestion. And this allows me one final kind of crack at everything. Boom. So again, here, got a bit of messiness, you know, like, do I need that? Nope. Let's get rid of that. Do I need that? No, I mean, that's not there. Right. What about that? Yeah, I mean, let's get that in there. Let's clean that up. What do we got here? Boom, boom, boom. Yep, got that. This one. Oh, missed a bit. There we go. Boom, boom, boom. And yeah, the real energy from this, I think, comes in practicing. So this is something you can kind of try, is keep practicing to hit those time limits. I think once if you're sitting there, if you're rushing too much with the ideas, but then you're kind of spending too long kind of figuring them out, it kind of gets the whole thing off whack, right? So, you know, these designs really aren't worth, you know, spending like all day on. You know, this is like a single pass, it's like a sheet, it's like the first thing. And then probably I'll sleep on this and be like, oh, you know what? That needs to be way more extreme, or like, this is ridiculously exaggerated. And this kind of starts the dialogue. This is often how I kind of handle this kind of creative process, which is like, I kind of have some ideas here, but I'm trying to kind of make them real and see what's going on there. Oh, that's right. Yeah, so the dragon leg is there. Yeah, so I kind of like have some ideas. Some of them are written, some sort of vague, whatever. But overall, I kind of need something visual to take it to the next stage. All right. So I got that done. Let's select the lines. Get rid of this. All right, let's see what happens when, see if I can flip it. Yep, there we go. I forget whether even that's kind of how we started, or I think it actually started the other way around. I think this works well though. Let me see if I can get the actions right. Not quite. I think I pressed the wrong button. So let's take that all the way over there. And boom, that's what I wanted. All right, so here I can take these off. All right, now I've got this. And we will, where's the color? Window, color, cool. Nice, boom. So we're gonna start. So how dark is that? I feel like that is a bit dark. Let's go for some silhouettes. Right, take that a little bit down. See if we can build some shadows here, which will really help define the character, like where they're sitting. Helps to place them. You can also put indications of the weapons and things that they've got. I think this is super useful. Just describing a bit of what's going on, and then we can also think about adding like a contrast square. And you could either do this, right, like sort of drawn, like I'm doing it here, or you could just use the marquee tool. Totally up to you. I often find this stuff just helps a little bit to stop everything getting kind of lost. It also helps if you're putting in a, right, like a backlight or something. So this is just one of these design tools, right, like a contrast square that I think just often really helps to just give extra sort of contrast as the character is kind of going, sort of creating a silhouette, right? It creates more opportunity for a silhouette. So let's think about the design here. So I think what I want is for all of these characters to be this sort of mix of kind of bluey gray, like sort of quite dark. Right, so let's think of them like this, and I'll just sort of prototype one, right? Let's think about some sort of lighter colors here that could sort of work for like the beard. Boom. And yeah, this is what we do. Just kind of keep messing around, trying to find that pattern that is going to work and give us a nice, interesting visual breakup. The other thing we want to kind of play around with is, yeah, what kind of blue do we want here? So I like the idea of there being this kind of deep blue. That is kind of underneath a lot of this. Boom. Boom. All right, this probably needs to be a bit. It's got some sort of armory stuff on here. Right. Got this. So you can see we're still keeping it super rough. Yeah. All right, let's put in the rest. It has that old school barbarian style vibe going on, which again is exactly the point. So I'll try to mix in some sort of warm colors here, I guess. Think about the sword maybe being kind of a warm color. Some of these ropes being like a warm color. And yeah, maybe I'll put some of that tonality in there. Boom, boom. Yeah, see how we go. So yeah, super simple color scheme, but yeah, it should work. So let's look at how we can apply this color scheme to a lot of the other characters. First, let's tackle these guys. And after that, one of the things I do kind of notice is she is kind of big, right? This kind of wizardy creature. Yeah, she's like a bit big relative on scale. So I might look at rezzing her down or just resizing her down a little bit in a minute. But let's do first things first. Let's just apply those same basic principles to these characters. Now, what color skin should this guy have? I think maybe some kind of green skin would be good. Now, using this line and color technique, it's pretty easy to adjust that skin color or any of these other colors and get a little bit of a bead, a little bit of an eye on what is going to work. So this is often how I would play around with these colors. I'd sort of put in the very rough version of it and then kind of play around with it. Now you could obviously do this same type of selection with a more painted style, but I find that just thinking about the color block out with a line and color style does make it really easy. So if you have the one set up properly here, you could easily just ignore the lines on top, but I think it's good just alt click on the flats and that'll kind of hide everything else. Right now, Control H, Control U, right, and that'll bring up hue saturation. And then what I do is I kind of step back, right, think about what is going on. So I kind of want him to be more green, right? So I'm moving it more towards the green, maybe even like sort of that. And yeah, this is a really easy way to just kind of get the right kind of vibe going. All right, I'm going to take these same blue cloaks though. Oh, let's select that. And the other thing you could do is Control All right, so we've still got that selected. I could do Control I or Shift Control I will invert the selection, Control H again, and now I can kind of just paint with that same blue, but it will ignore all of the skin. You can also do that with layers quite effectively. Just sort of put the skin on another layer and then sort of paint a lot of that progressively. But I find just thinking about flat colors, because I do this same technique and style for comic books and everything else, it's kind of fairly easy. Now, this is where for these types of illustrations, which are just kind of thumbnail concept sketches really, and we're trying to sort of explore different characters that are within this same visual data set, let's say. The best thing to do is just literally just copy the colors, right? So I can just eyedrop those different colors, and that'll give me like a pretty good indication of how all of these characters are going to be different. So let's see if we can clean this up a tiny bit. I was going really fast because I was I sort of had to run earlier, and now I've sort of come back to this. So I'm kind of like, oh, now I have a few more minutes here or there. But sometimes, you know, that stuff's probably not going to make much difference. Just here and there, it can be good to refine some of those shapes and maybe. Yeah, just sort of clean it up a little bit. Now, not exactly sure how that's kind of working, but we could just do a bit of this where even though I'm not thinking about shading with these, although you could, I'm just going to make some elements of it a lot kind of darker, right? So we can kind of think of these feet as being, all right, just a little bit darker, just different sort of tonality. All right, same with maybe the tail. And you could think about, I'll hit a lower opacity. I hit 4 to go to 40%. And you could also think about this, where maybe there is some sort of animalistic pigmentation difference between various elements of this guy's skin, right? That'll often sort of shift things with, it's sort of symbolic of animals, essentially. Maybe make the hands as well a little bit different. Go back up to 100%, right? Let's see if we can just put in, again, with color, because that's a tool we've got. See if we can put in some little indications of claws and things. And a lot of these little tricks and your understanding of whether you do this with line, with color, like what is and isn't possible, this kind of stuff just comes with reps, right? When you're doing a lot of concept design professionally, you just kind of tend to do a lot of these tasks, right? And you just kind of experiment, figure out what works. Right, I like the idea of him maybe having some kind of lighter hair, although I'm not quite sure about that. We'll see kind of how that works. So again, this is a thing where I'm like, well, let's see if we can put it in with color, and this way we can kind of zoom out and be like, does that help, right? Does it make it more interesting? I mean, I think it does. The other thing I was thinking of is like maybe we should make the eyes blue, right? Like everyone's eyes could be sort of blue. Boom. And also good, again, if you have time, we can, right, select a more, right, red lip inside of the mouth red as well. And all these little things will just give you indications of what, you know, what is or is not going to work. Boom. Boom. So yeah, I feel like this is sort of getting there. Could also think about, this is where you can start to play with the graphic breakup and sort of say like, okay, well maybe we do want to have some different wrappings on these legs, right? And I can just experiment with that with color, because this is essentially functioning like a mix of a thumbnail and a mix of a kind of simple concept pass, right? It's kind of a bit in the middle. You can kind of experiment, right? And play with the internal silhouettes as well. Look at what might be interesting, add a little bit, right? Like, would it be better if these were sort of darker? Would it be better if these were sort of lighter, right? Like what is going to be interesting? What is going to make this fun? And the more you can just play around with those simple things, the easier it is to ideate, right? So we're after as many times and different ways that we can add ideas and do it really quickly, right? Well, let's put some of that on. So yeah, now what are these things on his back? I don't know, but I did like the idea of them being some kind of, right, like some kind of weapon or sort of weird thing. So this is where often, you know, I will kind of do this and then I'll just kind of leave myself a little mystery, right? Again, they could be blue as well. That might be sort of fun. Again, some kind of thing there. Like, what's that about? I don't know. And we can come back to that. Or it might just, you know, disappear because it's not that interesting. Who knows? All right, done with that. Let's try this one. So with this, what I'm going to do is, yeah, let's block in the pattern of this cloak that she's got. So a lot of line and color theory when it comes to process, if you are sort of flatting, and a lot of what you spend your time doing is thinking about the minutiae of what color goes on top of what. So if you're after efficiency here and you're not wanting to play around too much with selections and all that kind of stuff, because again, that does slow you down and it does get you into a slightly different thought process that's a bit less creative. One of the things you can do is just think about, well, what color would go first? And if I kind of make sure that the base is a decent color, right? Like this sort of gray is like a nice sort of neutral. And then I play with that next color. I feel like a bit more red, a bit less saturated. Right. And then what I'm going to do is really just put this in where I think it would be, right? Like, oh. And I'm treating this very much like it is more of a traditional painting, right? Just putting this mark in, and we've got that gray base. So the gray base is actually going to do a lot of the work for us in terms of making stuff kind of disappear and be very subliminal, right? Because I have the tonality sorted. And by that, I mean, we just have the values of that gray base here, like this base, sort of nicely balanced with the background, nicely balanced with the general tonality of what I'm using, like the feel of it, which is like this is a bit of a darker story or I guess project. So we're not having to worry quite so much about making it look bright and colorful or anything like that. So if I kind of balance that, right, if we sort of take the lines away, you can see there's all this sort of messy stuff. Because it's tonally in a good spot, it all kind of works right. And this means you can get away with a multitude of sins of being messy, because I'm just sort of doing it in the right sequence, and that I don't have to, I'm sort of matching the level of detail that, you know, is probably gonna be sensible. So I feel like I did have here, there was the idea maybe that she kind of had some boots on or something like that. Let's try that as a silhouette idea. Yeah, maybe make those sort of brown. So you can see that a lot of what is actually being functionally created here with this type of concept art is like a silhouette breakup, right? So it really is functioning at this level, and that's kind of the value of it. And the reason that we just kind of draw it in a messy way is that I think it just allows a particular type of creativity, particular type of drawing is more likely to happen when we're thinking bigger and we actually do have the details. So even though we're thinking thumbnail, we have a little bit more room to play. It's going to give us slightly more whimsy with the lines. And yeah, I just find that sort of brings out a particular type of design clarity that I think is sort of useful. So if you're more focused, if you find that you are struggling to push the shapes, or that you need a different design task solved, then that's where working with silhouettes can be more useful. You know, like, let's forget the detail, let's forget the faces, let's forget all that. But there are many situations where like just drawing it, like just doing a bunch of quick sketches and drawings, can be just as useful. And it doesn't take that much longer than doing some thumbnails, but the result is very, very different. All right, so let's make this character smaller. How do we do that? Well, there's a number of ways. I'm just going to do a quick and nasty sort of version of that. Control Shift J, and I'm going to do, and that basically just separates out the whatever was on that layer onto its own layer. So I'll do that for both these characters here. And then I'm going to set with Alt, got free transform, Control T, and I'll hit Alt, set that transform point lower. And then I'm sort of thinking now, like, yeah, that feels like, at least her kind of head is like a similar kind of size. We can maybe make it a little bit bigger. But yeah, even smaller, right? It's probably, I feel like that's kind of cool. Now, I'm just going to merge that down, Control E, and I'm going to merge that down, and then let's clip it back for fun. And then, yeah, away we go. And similar thing here, I might make this sort of skin a little bit sort of darker here. Bolt. And I like the idea of her kind of having this white hair. So again, I'll put in the hair first, because I feel like that's like an interesting design aesthetic. And we can probably just go over everything else, right? Because I've got the hair there, I can go back and add other stuff later. All right, so the other thing, oh yeah, I forgot, I need to add the blue here. Let's add the blue. Boom. It really does help if you're doing this type of task to have the whole thing up in the new window, like on a second monitor or something like that. Makes it really, really easy to then kind of just view that thumbnail scale and be like, does that work? Also, let's think about maybe the hair color she does have. All right, go over here. Did she have earrings of some kind? I don't know, but I just like that idea. And these are all just ideas, right? We see what's happening. I might throw it all away. Often when I'm doing these types of projects, sometimes the whole first week, so I do a couple of these a day, or at least one of these a day. And we kind of throw all of those out. It doesn't really matter that much. Again, it's mostly about the process and the thought process that we sort of develop and go through as we are sort of thinking about this. Boom, there we go. So yeah, it's not just the end result that I think is important here. It's the process, it's the feedback that we would create, in a team, or just if I'm doing this by myself. Again, this is just personal project, so I just do this myself, right? I'm just sort of thinking about it. But I think this is it's one of those things where if you like drawing, this I think is actually really, really valuable, right? As a thing to do. And it's one of these reasons why, a lot of people who are super pro AI and they're kind of saying, or not super pro, but people who are like, oh, this is good because it, sorts out that initial ideation phase, which is exactly this, right? It's like, I got no idea, let's just throw some ideas down. Let's get the ball rolling. The thing is that struggling with that, right? Thinking about like, oh, okay, I don't have any ideas. Like, how do I do that? What's the process? It's not just something where like you want to automate that away, because I think there's a lot of value in that process for getting good results, not just from some amby-pamby kind of artistic, like, oh, this is what it means to be. No. Just saying like legitimately just as part of the process of trying to make stuff better. If you kind of are forced to deal with those challenges. So if I sort of do, maybe let's say we got 4 characters here, and if I sort of work on this for a week, maybe I do one of these a day, maybe sometimes, a little bit more if I'm sort of really sort of cranking. Again, I'm doing it a little bit faster here just for the demo, but yeah, you got like sort of 20 to 30 little sort of character designs. And the thought process there is what's important. Even if we throw them all away, even if they're all not very interesting, even if none of it works, the point is that we've covered quite a lot of ground, and it has taken time. But that time is valuable because now I understand what's working, what's not, and then the next round are sort of much more valuable. And all that information is like downloaded into my brain now, which I think is the key aspect here. That again, a lot of people who maybe are working more transactionally in their jobs, right? Which again is like might be an issue if you are just kind of sitting there being like, my job is just to create thumbnails and create these designs, and I don't really care about them, and it's not about creating good designs or whatever. Maybe there's a process that works for people, but I find that part of what's happening is that we're kind of learning about the project as we go, right? And exploring it. And that, yeah, speed running that is, of questionable value. So, let me know how that sort of lands for you, right? I'd be interested to kind of hear whether that tracks, whether it sounds just like sort of artistic nonsense, right? I'm sure there's a lot of people who are just like, you're just old. Just don't know what you're talking about. It's so much better. Yeah, so that's sort of my experience with this anyway. And the reason I think these types of exercises are important. And the thing is, yeah, you just spend a lot of time thinking about it as you're working on it, right? Even if you could sort of speed the process up, get a whole bunch of different ideas here, right? For me, there's a degree to where just looking at it a lot sort of makes me think of other ideas. And I find that just in general then, over the week, over the month, I start to get a much better feel for the project. and yeah, start to really sort of connect with it. And if you're developing your own story, right? And this is where, again, those ideas of AI might be like a little bit more useful if it is just super transactional. If you can just kind of speed run this process, maybe that is a value. Maybe you don't want to get too attached to any of these ideas emotionally. But I think for developing your own projects, this is time where you can think about the story. You're thinking about all the different aspects of it. And to me, that kind of side is super valuable. So yeah, I'm not sure about this. Not sure about this design here. I'm like, I thought it would be cooler than it is. So it might be good too. Let's see if we can just kind of select that, select this. Control H, Control U. Let's see if like making it lighter, or I feel like if I could maybe make this blue. That might be more interesting. Yeah. Not sure. Let's go. So just undo. Right. Is that better? Is it worse? I'm not sure. I think I have to leave it like this. Might be better if the dragon kind of stands out. Just looking a bit kind of busy, right? Like it's hard to know where to focus. Maybe we should just make this skin a bit more sort of vibrant or kind of brighter. All right, so it kind of stands out more. Maybe we could make this dragony kind of thing a bit brighter as well, right? Really make that stand out. Like it's kind of more magical, right? Yeah, hard to say. But yeah, I think I probably run the course of playing around with these. Now, there's certain degrees to where you can plus these drawings, and it's always a matter of saying like, hey, you know, are these working? Is it a matter of going further? Is there something where I do want to push them a little bit more, add a little bit more detail because I feel like some of them are working well, or would you just want to kind of ship it because like, not really feeling it right now? But something you could obviously do is we could duplicate some of these lines a little bit. And what I would do is just add a mask to that. So hold down Alt while you're putting on a quick mask, and that'll mask it out. So now I kind of have that second set of lines, but they're kind of masked out. And then, all right, I'm just going to sort of say, look, are there some areas where it'd be good to kind of push the lines a bit more? Right. And this will just add a little bit more contrast, right? And another thing you can obviously do is, and there's a number of ways you can do this. Right, I'm going to go back to just using the simplest, right? This is literally just the pencil tool. I'm just going to pick that color because I feel like that's kind of in the right vein. It's maybe a bit lighter, sort of 30 or 40, sort of a warm color. I'm going to make a new hard light layer, right? I have a keyboard shortcut, new hard light layer. And this will allow me to sort of put in some shadow. And probably, yeah, I feel like, let's make this a bit, I feel like 40 is often a good. With hard light, 50% gray will make it sort of just transparent, right? Won't show up. But yeah, somewhere around there. And you could just add like a sort of cartoony style shading pass to this if you want. But the other thing is, depending on how much you want to go, you could just do this here and there, right? I can just add this as like, let's add a couple of accents, right? Let's see if I can push and pull some of this focus, right? So there might be some areas where you really want it. And, this has a lot to do with, I guess, style, or how we think about our particular sort of artistic choices. So, you have to be confident here of what you're doing in terms of style. But you can essentially just go through and be like, I'm just going to add a few little bits and pieces, right? I'm not trying to render this realistically, but maybe where there are some things that are meant to be metal, if I just add a little bit of, that guy should be blue, but yeah, if I had to add just a little bit of something, right, it's just going to lift it a little bit. And yeah, you often find that, just these little things can make a big difference in terms of selling it. Again, I'm probably not gonna. Probably don't need to sell these sketches, right? These are so rough that it's either gonna work or it's not gonna work. But you can see that just adding this little bit, right? Adding a little bit here and there will really sort of start to just build a bit more dimension, right? Makes it feel as if it's not quite so flat, and sometimes that can be really useful, right? So again, a bit of shadow under here, just kind of here and there. And you could also do this in a much stronger way, right? Or you could just sort of quickly go through and add a full shading pass to this, right? Like, boom. Let's see how long this takes, right? So we're at, right, let's see if we could do 2 minutes and add a little bit of something, right? And this will vary, again, depending on how much experience you have doing this. This might be something that takes you a lot longer. In which case, you just have to measure your expectations, right? If you're struggling to figure out the form and add something kind of meaningful in that kind of time, then yeah, don't do it. It's there's things that I wouldn't do because I know that that's going to take me too long. It's all a matter of thinking about what you kind of can do in a particular time, right? But I'm just thinking very broadly about like where there might be sort of shadows. Just doing that kind of shadow pass and seeing whether that kind of helps. So this is just hard light layer again. That'll just sort of darken everything underneath it. So I have these flat colors, and then underneath that, boom, we go a bit darker. Or on top of that, we go a bit darker. All right. So you can see, like, so this is another trick, is like I kind of have major forms done in an interesting way. Now I'm just going to hit 50% on my keyboard. And what this does is it's going to give me a lighter sort of version of that. And what I'm going to do is just kind of think about, well, his whole chest is kind of facing away from the light, right? And this whole arm is probably facing away from the light. And maybe the tops of these legs are facing away from the light. And probably these feet are facing away from the light. And this is kind of facing away from the light. And right, I could also play around with maybe a bit more sort of shading. Yeah, and then we're like, okay, I've added a little bit. All right, I've probably used up my 2 minutes. But the interesting thing about hard light is you can use on the same layer, you can actually go the other way. So what I could do is I'm going to go back to 100% opacity, and I'm going to select a color that is just above 50%, right? And I'm going to reduce the opacity here way down. So this is basically just now going to bring up, it's going to bring up what's underneath it a little bit. Just a tiny bit. And now I could think about, right, adding some highlights. And again, this can easily run away from you in terms of you putting in too many silly highlights and it kind of doesn't work, right? But I'm just sort of doing this as a quick example of technique. I probably would not do any of this with this level of drawing because it's so easy to kind of mess it up. And basically, if you're trying to render stuff that isn't there, you're going to always run into trouble. But just as an example of like, could you plus this quickly, right? Like, yeah, we could add a lot more dimensionality. We could add a lot more feeling of detail just kind of very quickly by sort of pushing and pulling some of that form. And yeah, this can often be the kind of stuff that makes a difference. Boom, boom. Right. So we can see there, pretty quickly. I don't know how long that's been taking, probably like 4 minutes, something like that. Yeah. So this is just very simple application of super basic tools. Just like if you know how to use, for instance, the pencil tool. So this is the brush I'm using, right? Just got pencil tool, boom, boom, boom. This is the dumbest brush in Photoshop. It has no opacity, no texture, no nothing. It is sort of size sensitive, but yeah, it's literally just pixels when you zoom up. Because I'm not needing to go for a really high level of detail or polish, if I understand how the hard light layer works and I can just adjust the colors, then all of a sudden I can start to just really quickly rough some things in and get some interesting kind of looks going. So again, this is what I'm often talking about. If you take any of the courses that I do, I'm often like, let's take the simplest tools and let's really figure out how to use them. Anyway, I'm not saying that this looks that much better, right? If we sort of take the thing off, I'm like, I kind of like the color that's flat, right? I think it works just as well. All right, let's look at another stylistic thing we could do. Right, again, I'm going to pick this color because I feel like it was a pretty good sort of base. And what you kind of find is, right, when I do pick something that's a lot darker, you can see this is adding much more graphic impact. So I'm going to reduce the saturation of that a little bit because I feel like that is sort of just pushing the saturation a bit. But this is where I can go through and almost like right at the end, I can start adding some extra sort of graphic pop, right? I can really emphasize some little particular details and elements of the drawing. And this will often, right, if I just sort of think about like where would some shadows be, and if I really sort of play up and just push a couple of those, yeah, I often find this will make a huge difference, right? So it's almost like I'm thinking about adding these marks as if they were part of the inking layer, right? And I'm doing sort of more drawing on top now. But this will give a completely different look, right? So I'm not saying these are sort of compatible. We're just kind of playing around. But I can, for instance, I can go over the top and add a little bit more sort of texture to some of these areas. Yeah. Right. And if you need to sort of emphasize something, right? If I need to kind of push some area, or like now I've sort of decided, okay, she's sort of got this barbarian sort of style bikini top on, right? Like, can I define that further just with these lines? Like, yeah, we can, right? If something's really not working, I can say, let's push that back, right? Let's see what happens when we kind of play around with this. And again, it's just another creative tool. And again, if we sort of take that off, boom, right, you can see like it adds a little bit of something. That's another sort of couple of minutes where we're like sort of plussing that a little bit. So let's look and see if we can do that here, because I feel like this character has a couple more little bits and pieces that I feel like could be better defined here, right? So we could sort of really push the silhouette here, right next to her face. For instance, we could sort of think about, this feels like this should be plaits. I could go along here and maybe kind of add a few little bits and pieces to this dragon, refine the feeling of where this kind of hits. Boom, boom. And yeah, where we've got some, right, let's say, I want to sort of push that back, right, where we've got some these sort of folds. Let's go in there. Let's plus that. All right. And this is like a very artistic, non-logical thing to do. This is like semi-based on me thinking about where the light is coming from, but this is also kind of based on like inking theory that you would sort of have in comic books, where often we're sort of, it's kind of called spotting blacks, and that's where, just from a visual aesthetic point of view, often you are sort of trying to anchor the sort of black and white art and add some sort of variety to it. So yeah, this is not logical. This is just sort of graphical, pictorial breakup. Boom. All right. And again, especially under here, right, where I kind of had this sort of mishmash of stuff, right, now that I've sort of got that there, I can go through, add a few little bits and pieces, especially under here. So before, like this, if we just sort of look at the lines, right, you know, this was kind of just random lines. But because I've kind of figured out, okay, like I've got this thing overlaying this thing, and then I go in there with this and yeah, start to kind of push some of those ideas. And yeah, it's just adding a little bit, right? Same thing here, right? Just adding a little bit. The other thing you can obviously do is, if you feel like you want to experiment with shapes, right? I can just literally paint over the top of this and just kind of say, well, let's explore what would happen if some of these things were, had like vastly different shape language, right? Or if you're kind of saying, no, like I actually want this particular shape. And again, now that I've got that sort of more graphic, shadowy shape there, I can play around with this, right? There's no right or wrong. There's no rules with any of these things. And the other thing you could do is kind of say, well, I didn't really draw that dragony sort of bit, right? Like this sort of hand properly. So let's go back. Let's have another go at doing that. Right, let's see if we can refine some of these points. And yeah, away we go. Or I could sort of say, let's see if I can add some extra thickness to that tail if you want. Again, you can just play around, right? Basically, that's the TLDR, is you can refine the shapes, see what works. And because it's just this initial pass, it doesn't matter, right? So here I've got this thing where like probably we want to see and experiment with what this dragon is actually going to look like, and maybe there's too many lines there, right? Maybe I kind of messed that up. Or maybe I want to kind of say, no, this stuff behind it is actually much brighter. So yeah, anyway, that's the general idea there. And yeah, the more you want to kind of experiment, play with sort of blocking that out and sort of look at, like, does this graphic breakup work? What is going on here? Yeah, you could also play with the hand shape or whatever. And then you could go over with more lines, whatever it is, right? So here I've got boom, boom. I mean, is it any better? Look, probably not, right? I'm not actually spending that much time doing stuff, but these are just all the little tips that you can use to ideate with the most basic tool, right? And again, for me, this is all a matter of saying, like, I don't have a brush that will really allow me to do interesting artistic things. So, and again, this comes back to this basic concept of when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. If you're kind of having a fancy brush that's good at painting, that's probably what you'll do. Whereas, if you have a brush that is only really good for doing this stuff, just sort of brutal design work, then, that's probably what will happen. So anyway, there's a couple of ideas. I just thought I'd add those there. It's made this a little bit longer, but hopefully it's a bit more sort of educational. Yeah, so now, again, probably what I'd think about doing is we can go control click on that layer, control click on this layer, right? These lines that I've sort of added over the top. And now, boom, let's look at, make a group here, and yeah, it might be good to play around with some sort of large atmosphere. So often these will feel a little bit, right, like a little bit flat, a little bit cartoony. What I often find is just adding a little bit of atmosphere, right? A little bit of atmosphere will kind of help a lot. So there's another one of these tools. And also kind of going a little bit darker on the bottom, right? So we're just kind of fading out right towards the bottom because we just sort of want to focus a little bit more on the top. And the other thing you could do here is utilize a hard light layer again. So use another hard light layer, and you could play around with, you know, making them feel a little bit sort of warmer, right, on top like that. And this would just give it, again, that sort of extra, like boom. All right, now it feels a little bit less like we've just got really simple line and color work. Although again, that may be sort of what you want. I could also select this because this is on its own layer. Control U, and yeah, you can play around with the color, right? Like maybe again, like it would be better to kind of have the green there. Boom, and yeah, maybe we could play around with what's up here. Right. Yeah, that looks kind of cool. And think about like what's gonna be here. Oh yeah, I feel like that. Yeah, that looks cooler. But again, just gonna select that. So I've basically just got these big airbrush hard light layers, and I'm just selecting that and then just tweaking that sort of color, right? So I can get that kind of working. Next kind of thing you could do or play around with, and that might be good to see whether that works there as well, right? If we make this much bluer, does that work better? I don't know. Anyway. You can keep sort of tweaking for hours. It's easier to spend like way more time here than we probably should. But yeah, I mean, other things we could do is just sort of look at generally adjusting the sort of overall colors of everyone so that we do kind of get the right vibe. Right, we could take the blacks, right, sort of pull those blacks down if we wanted to get more contrast. We could also say, let's do hue saturation, right? Again, let's just take the saturation down, right? Except for kind of where we want. So just pick like a general sort of focal area on the character, right? We'll bring the saturation back there, but you know, let's keep everything else really simple. Yeah, just tweak, refine, play around. And yeah, you can just keep going with this, right? I could also see whether, like if we want to push, oh, let's select that. Let's go neutrals. All right, let's really push the skin tones here, make them kind of red. And then select color range, right? Let's see whether we can push some of these colors. Just make them a little bit more interesting, right? That'll add a bit of color pop to things. And that's probably a little bit extreme, but then now that I've done that, I can just kind of dial that back, right? Just make it slightly less crazy. Yeah, again, this will look completely different on different screens. The other thing you could do, now that you've sort of got all those, we could hit levels, right? We can push some of the contrast there. make things much more poppy, right? And then let's just make that just select the luminosity, right? And then where I feel like that's kind of hitting things a bit hard, right? Where we've already got some contrast, we can just kind of delete it. So anyway, probably another sort of, what have we done? Probably another 15 minutes, I reckon, of like just playing around, like tweaking, adding a few little bits and pieces. Yeah, and that has sort of taken it up to a slightly different level. Yeah. So anyway, you don't probably need to do like most of those things. They're just kind of for fun, but yeah, often that stuff, does make the difference if you're looking to, like if you have a cool sketch and you're like, oh, that would be good. Let's just see if we can up the presentation value a little bit, tweak the colors, add a little bit more contrast, right? And if we sort of take that away and we add it, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's just a little bit more, makes them feel a little bit more illustrative, essentially. Yeah, but I think we're kind of done with this one. So that's all we got time for here. Thanks so much for hanging out. Again, I just wanted to share this process. This is essentially me just hitting record and messing around. But again, I did want to try and, talk about some different actual kind of techniques you can use to sort of plus these things at the end. But yeah, I find that this process is a really good way to just get something down on the page. And this is just the beginning of that process. So let me know which one of these you sort of like the most, like which character you think is the most interesting. Maybe we'll kind of work that one up in a follow-up episode. But yeah, I think these kind of rough mix between a thumbnail, a sketch, and something that sort of has a bit of color, has a bit of illustration. Again, it's all a matter of finding exactly what tool that is going to allow you to solve the design problem that you have at hand. In this case, I'm just wanting to sort of get some ideas started, and then often what happens is I look at those and go, we need to go bigger, right? We need to go more interesting. We need to go more exaggerated, or like these all look generic. Often those first few ideas that we have are those generic ideas. They are kind of just all the stuff that's kind of on the top of your head, and you need to kind of get those out and then say, what's next, right? Like, okay, we've done that. What next is going to take this to the next level, right? And really start to get much more creative. So anyway, this is just the first pass, but I thought it'd be good to share this. Let me know if you got any comments or questions about this. Yeah, other than that, we'll catch you around in the next one.